Yeah. Okay, it is just about time to get rolling again. Let's see. Okay. Haley, you're sideways, just so you know. There we go. Thank you. All right. Okay. Welcome back, all. So I have a number of topics that I wanted to cover in this last segment that we have together. But before we get to that, as we've been doing, I do want to make some time and space for anything at all that's on your mind that you want to ask or share or otherwise communicate. So this would be the time for that. We've covered a lot of ground, and I always do my best when I'm teaching to relate some of the specific concrete things that we're practicing and discussing to the bigger sort of underlying concepts and principles, really, that are at work. So I'm open to, you know, any kind of feedback or questions related either to the specific concrete sort of things like, you know, foot placement in poses or breathing techniques or anything like that. So the sort of technique-y stuff on the one hand, and then the more of the inquiry into the principles underlying what we're doing on the other. So anywhere where your interest is landing in that spectrum, I'm certainly open to hearing any of it. And so just wait. Okay, wait. There you go.
Barbara, so, it looks
yeah.
like Barbara has something to say. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah.
Okay, hi.
Hi there.
I have a question. I've been thinking a lot since yesterday about the comment you made concerning use of orthotics. And I have had orthotics for 25 plus years. So I'm curious about, so the two of the issues that I have are fallen arches and a problem in the metatarsal area. So I'm curious, especially about the metatarsal area, is how one goes about correcting, strengthening.
Okay. So the problem in the metatarsal area, is that some kind of a neuroma that you have, or?
I did have a neuroma in the right foot several years ago. And I had a lot of pain, and I think I mistakenly allowed a podiatrist to give me a cortisone shot, which I think he nicked a nerve, and now that toe has never gone back into the right position. Just this summer, I've kind of had some tingling, which I perceive may be the nerve, to kind of travel from that toe down into the foot.
Right.
I haven't worn my orthotics a lot this summer, with the exception of the days I work at the hospital. Otherwise, I have, I wear like a croc type sandal. I do have a heel lift on the left foot because of my pelvis is off. I know that's a lot of information. I just found the statement that the orthotic should have been a short-term fix, And now I'm wondering what process I can use, or what approach, what should I do at this point to help that issue?
Right, right. Well, a couple of questions occur to me based on what you've shared. First of all, you said for 25 years you've had some kind of orthotic in your shoe. Now, I imagine it's not the same pair of orthotics you've been wearing the whole 25 years.
Several.
So they've been revised over the course of time. Yes. So, and what was it that originally was going on that made you acquire them in the first place? It was some kind of pain you were having in your feet, some difficulty with your lower back. I mean, what led you to get them made in the first place?
I'll be really honest with you. It's so long ago. I don't remember. You know, it's just, I just don't. I think the main thing I remember was the adjustment after I got the orthotics. It took about 3 weeks because I felt a lot of discomfort and a lot of adjusting in my body. But it could have been lower back. I just don't remember.
Right. And what happens? What do you notice in your body if you walk around for any length of time without the orthotics, or do you even do that?
Right now, I don't notice a huge difference because whatever sandal I wear always has the heel lift on the opposite foot. But like I said, I have noticed this summer, this tingling, this twinging kind of traveling down through the second toe. That's the only thing.
Okay.
But I have some lower back issues.
Okay, well, here's another question. When we were doing that sort of warrior series practice this morning,
yes,
you were barefoot, presumably, without a lift under either of your feet. What did you notice then in your feet, in your legs, in the musculature that feeds into and supports your arches?
A lot more stability when I finally found those 3 points, and the small adjustments that I needed to make to get to that point.
Yeah.
And I think that's what spoke to me the most was the how I moved my feet ever so slightly and finally felt those 3 points very, very firmly.
Cool. Well, I would just say then more of that, you know. You asked what you can be doing, and you were in a situation where you weren't wearing orthotics, where you were able to connect to your feet. I didn't hear you say that, oh, my lower back started hurting me, or whatever symptoms in my feet have been happening got worse or inflamed or anything like that. So I would say, if for a long-term orthotics wearer to be able to have that kind of experience barefoot, using your feet that way, perhaps for the first time with that much attention on those 3 points in your feet, that's a really good sign that you may have some hope of actually being able to function without your orthotics at some point, or certainly with a lot less use of them, particularly since when you try to think of it, you can't even come up with a really good reason why you started wearing them in the first place. Well, it's one thing if your feet are really in pain without, it's one thing if your feet are really in pain without them. And then you have to consider, well, you know, what's going on here? Is there some kind of inflammatory thing going on? Do I have plantar fasciitis and all of that? And even if that's the case, usually my answer is, yeah, try something like what we did in the Warrior series and just do a little bit at a time and see if you can gradually build that strength back up. But it seems like you were able to literally sort of dive into that way of practicing without any major complications. And so it may be possible for you to really develop the sort of strength and integration and awareness and resilience in the feet that allows them to support you and your back without all of that help. I know Lydia ditched her orthotics pretty soon after she started working this way, right? And
Yep.
you'd been wearing those for quite a while. Yeah.
For so long. And, you had pointed out that they are basically a cast or a model of my feet on my feet's worst day. And why would I want to keep being forced into that shape? So once I started finding the inside of my feet, because that had been my issue more than, my feet seemed to think the world was shaped like this. So once I found the inside of my feet, and honestly, it was more about release than anything else. I mean, I'm sure there was some strengthening that was going on in those tiny little muscles in my feet. But for me, it was more about figuring out what to let go of. So that I could actually be in contact with the floor. I find much of what I do in yoga is about release. It's not about anything else.
Well, that was the main thing that even before we started with the yoga instruction with you way back when, 23 years ago, there was just a lot of work to do about releasing and breathing and all of that, because you've been walking around for so long on that painfully injured hip, and everything when your weight-bearing structures are generating that much pain when you're moving around the world, there's a tendency to kind of pull up and out of them and not allow yourself to release your weight fully down through your joints into the earth. And so, just to be clear, Lydia and I did not do any of the yoga stuff right away on day one. There was a whole
it was probably 6 months or so before I asked you about any of that.
Yeah.
I had to get off using the cane. I had to get off the painkillers and the scotch. And then I was ready to actually, then I could actually go to work without that. And then I could consider what else I might be able to add in. So.
Yeah. Lydia had become very skillful at managing her pain and being able to function at her job by taking little bits of the painkiller and washing it down with single malt scotch. It's a very potent combination if used intelligently. Sherry's going like, yeah. So
my orthopedist was rather horrified, but he was impressed that I took so little of the painkiller. So that was what it was I could take a fraction of it. And I wasn't getting stoned. I was just keeping myself out of pain enough that I could go to work and function for a bunch of hours and then manage to get home. New York City, you're walking all the time on concrete. So I had to be able to do that.
But you were able to stop doing that after you started breathing a little bit better and finding, the pathways of weight from your body to the earth. And
which was one of the things I was thinking about when, who was it who was speaking about her knee? I actually don't see her online right now. It was the woman with the stair, Kristen, with the stairs and behind her.
Yes.
It looks like she's not back. But when she was talking about what's going on with her knee, it reminded me of things that I have to sometimes work on with deep tissue massage, fascial release and stuff in my upper legs when I get pulling usually on the sides of my knees, not so much in the front, but it's once again about getting those tissues to release. So.
Yeah. So just to go back to the orthotic question, unless you have such a severely damaged or deformed or otherwise non-functional foot, there's usually a way to organize your connection to it so that you can find a pathway of weight that travels through it and find the action in some of those deeper muscles that support the arches and serve as a pathway for the support of the earth to come back up into your body, which is the job of the foot. And it really is true what I mentioned yesterday, that we all are living with somewhat compromised feet in the industrialized world, because we've basically inherited, on an evolutionary level, an all-terrain vehicle at the end of our legs, which hardly ever gets taken off road. And if an actual vehicle like that, had all of this capability, it had this, really adaptable, sturdy suspension system, and, transmission and shock absorbers and springs and all of that stuff that lets something really deal with uneven terrain, but you only ever take this vehicle and drive it on a perfectly flat road, to and from the mall every day, and then you suddenly start trying to take it off road, you're going to be dealing with some like rusty springs and frozen shocks and all the other systems that really stay functional through being used. If they remain unused for long enough, you're going to, have a lot of sort of remedial work to do. And, and it's always really gratifying to me to see how quickly this stuff comes back online once you start paying attention to it in just the right way. We had one woman in a workshop, and I can never remember where it was. I think maybe it was Minneapolis, who's a runner, an athlete who suffered from chronic plantar fasciitis. And we did that warrior series very much the way we just did it in this morning's session. And just in the course of that one session of her doing that on her bare feet with her plantar fasciitis, she activated the musculature in her foot that supported her arches enough that the plantar fasciitis pain virtually disappeared. And this is someone who had been suffering with it for a really long time and tried all these interventions that didn't work. And the explanation for why that worked so well for her was that when you think of it this way, if you've ever been at a job where you had sort of lazy coworkers, and basically you ended up doing not just your job but everyone else's job along with it, wouldn't you get a little resentful, after a while, if that was the situation? Well, here I'm putting up an image on the camera here. Okay, so here's the plantar fascia from below, and when Lydia was saying plantar plate, she was referring to these ligaments here, okay, which are sort of this front end of the plantar fascia. Is that clear? Can I make it better with the lighting? Is that a little clearer? Probably.
Yeah, it wants to be a little brighter, I think.
The room or the screen?
The screen.
Ah.
Stop.
That's
Stop. Stop. It's fine. Don't do any more.
Okay, I wasn't actually doing anything to the screen, but thank you for.
It must be my eyeballs.
Okay.
Maybe I need to keep them open. Maybe I have to stop letting them close.
Okay. I'm sorry I'm boring you so much that your eyes are closing. So, but if you look at it from the side, okay? See this band here that's depicted in green? That's the plantar fascia. And like a bowstring, where the arch shape of the foot is the bow and the plantar fascia is the string, it really does support that shape of the foot. But it's fascia, it's ligamentous tissue, it's not muscle. So look at the space here between the plantar fascia and the bones of the foot. That's where the muscles live. That's where you have like 5 layers of muscle, all right? And it's really the job of those layers of muscle to support the arch of the foot. But when they're not doing their job, all that's left is the plantar fascia to prevent total collapse of that structure. Just like your lazy coworkers who aren't doing their job, and you end up doing not only your job but theirs, that's going to inflame you. I would feel inflamed if that was my work situation, and that's exactly what happens to the plantar fascia. It gets inflamed because it's doing all of the work to keep this thing from collapsing. But the minute you start activating all of those muscles in the foot, and they start exerting that upward lifting kind of an energy into the structure of the foot, it takes all of that pressure off of the plantar fascia, and it can be an enormous relief. So we have seen, direct experiential evidence of people who have even chronic kind of inflammatory stuff going on in their foot, have it improved through a little bit of that practice where you're being attentive to the 3 points of your foot, and when you're allowing the weight to travel down through those, the upward forces that travel in the other direction to the arches get activated, and it makes the whole thing work better. So good luck with ditching the orthotics there. Yeah. So any other, anything else, anything at all that's on your mind that you want to ask or share?
Looks like Heidi has something.
Yes, I see. Hi. Go ahead.
Oh.
There you are.
So I just wanted to share something that has just popped up for me. Well, it's the practice and the techniques that you've been to, and I even think the conversation started a little bit Friday night. That like for me, I love it's resonated so much, and so much. I don't want to use the word validation, but it's more of an embodiment, even more for me, in the way that you've got the practice, you have the techniques, and the practice is there's a naturalness to that practice, and the technique is what we add when we choose to add something. If it's a personal practice or if we're teaching others, that we bring a technique in. If it's inhaling, lift your arms, exhale, fold. That's a technique. It doesn't mean that it's the only way or the right way.
Right.
So we have this practice, this beautiful natural flow of practice that the body moves with the breath, right? You're not even telling it how to move or directing it, moving. And then you layer on a technique. And it's not the only technique, but it's the technique you're choosing for yourself in that day, you're choosing to teach that day. And I love that there's a practice and there's techniques. There's there's something we teach in our teacher training, and it's called practice and techniques. And so when you have been speaking to that, I love that clarity, and they can layer each other as well. It's like a flow, an ebb that can go in and out. So that was something that just really resonated through this whole weekend of, you've got the Kalabati breathing. It's a technique for breathing. And you also just have the practice of breathing. So, and it's neither one is right or wrong. It's just what it is.
Right. I thank you for sharing how that's resonating with you, and it sounds very validating to the perspective that you've had and that you're sharing with your trainees. I think I would want to be a little clearer how you would distinguish practice from technique in what you were just talking about, because I'm talking about technique and inquiry, right? That was the way I framed it, and I was sort of framing the relationship between them as they need to be there in some proportion with each other. And the distinction is that a technique you can get it wrong. It's either like you're able to do it or you're not able to do it, or you're able to do it to some extent, and then you're trying to sort of refine it. Like, that Kapalabhati technique I taught, because you mentioned that, there's definitely a direction that the exhale needs to travel in order for it to be Kapalabhati, right? You can't be squeezing and pushing down as if you're pooping and say that that's the technique, right? So I was contrasting that to inquiry, for which there is no possible wrong answer, including I'm confused. That's fine. And so I was relating that to the idea of sthira and sukha, of the structure, the stable thing that kind of creates the framework for what we're doing, and then the spaciousness we have within that pursuit of a technique that allows us to inquire how it's relevant to me. How do I need to approach it based on what this technique is teaching me about myself? Because the whole reason for doing a technique, to learning a new way to breathe or a new way to move, is to uncover and unlearn to some extent your old way of breathing and moving, right? So that was the way I framed it. But then you used the term practice and technique, which sounds similar but a little bit different to me. So I'm just curious how you would distinguish those two terms and their relation to each other.
So the word inquiry for me, is the biggest part of the practice, the noticing, the inquiry. Yeah, okay. And so it is in that technique, it is in that practice of the notice, right? Notice the experience, notice the experience that you're in the way that if the technique is not working for you, or if it's not landing in your body, then just go back to that practice, and there could be another technique, but that's that inquiry, that's that discovery, is the possibility that there's not a right in that inquiry. It might be something that's just not a fit. So it's that noticing all the time, and that's, notice this, notice that.
Right. Okay.
And not allowing yourself to lose that inquiry. It's that's my favorite part of yoga.
So for you, the word practice was kind of a stand-in for the way I was using the word inquiry.
Yes.
You're practicing inquiry, basically.
Yes.
Is what it sounds like. Good. Thank you. And that reminded me of something that I wanted to say that maybe I wasn't clear enough about, because sometimes it's easy to misunderstand some of these challenges that I'm making to this standard sort of alignment speak. I'm not saying that it's a bad or a wrong thing to direct a student to keep their knee over their ankle. That's a technique, right? That's a goal, that's an objective. And so that raises all kinds of questions on the inquiry level. It's like, do I have enough awareness to know whether my knee is over my ankle or not? That's a very valuable possible outcome of giving someone that cue. All right. So I wasn't saying it was a bad cue. I was saying you can't justify the cue as being the only right or safe place for that knee to be, and claim that if you violate it and move your knee forward, it's going to somehow damage it. So I just wanted to be like super clear and contextualize a comment like that. I was not at all implying that that's not something we should cue people to do, right? When you're giving someone a specific cue about where you would like them to place their body, whether you're orienting them in a geometric way to their mat or the room or the lines on their yoga mat or whatever it is, okay, there could be a way of contextualizing that as a very useful bit of awareness, like an objective in awareness for that person. I would just really challenge the additional sort of mindset that makes that thing the only correct, safe way to be doing it. So I just hope that distinction is clear. For example, when I had you up in that warrior thing, and I had you turn your head towards the back as you went into warrior 2. And we'll be talking about that arm position in a minute, because that's leads us into the discussion of arm supports, right? But when I had you looking behind you, which is where you usually don't look when you're going into warrior 2, you're usually looking towards the front where you can actually see where your knee is, right? But I had you not use your eyes and then organize where your knee wanted to be based on how well you could organize the foot, the 3 points of the foot that was supporting the knee, okay? That's an example of using an inquiry that's relying on proprioception to create a placement for the knee, and you may very well have noticed when you finally turned your eyes around and looked down at it that, wow, it's right over my ankle. I didn't say put it over your ankle. I just said put it where it best sort of relates to a balanced foot, right? Did anyone have sort of a, you know, an insight or a memory as to what that was like when I asked you to do that in that moment, in that series? Because that's one example of, there's another moment when that happens in that series, and I pointed it out specifically in Warrior, getting set up for Warrior 3, where you can't actually see where your back leg is. You can't see its angle in relation to the floor. You can just feel it. And then you put your spine at the same angle. That's all proprioceptive awareness I'm asking you to do. Now, if you had a mirror, just to go back to the mirror question, you could glance to the side, to the mirror on that wall, and use, you know, that feedback to tell you where that leg was and where your spine was in relation to it, right? That would lead to a very different experience. And because so much of what we're aiming for in general with folks, especially as they're beginning this process, beginning this journey of yoga, is that question of like, where is your prana? Is it outside of your body or is it inside of your body? How reliant are you? How dependent are you in your asana practice, and perhaps in your life in general, on external sources of validation to let you know that what you're doing is okay? See, because that's really a mirror. That's a mirror of how we are in the world, how we show up in our practice. Okay. Lydia, can you do me a favor? Can you hear me?
Sure, I can hear you.
Can you just go off the Zoom for a minute and give my brother a call? I just saw a text come in. I think something's going on.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. All right.
Sure.
All right. So and then she'll be back. And so keeping in mind that the more we can become self-guiding in our practice, and the more we can tune into, acknowledge, value, and respond to what our inner experience is telling us in our practice, the safer we can be, because we're the only ones that can really, in the end, make sure that what we're doing is safe and effective for us, right? It goes back to what I said in the beginning of me having to recognize what my role is as a teacher. You know, I can't make everyone in my class safe. If someone wants to hurt themselves, they're going to do it. Maybe they don't want to hurt themselves. Maybe just their way of being, you know, leads to situations where they can be hurt because their prana is all over the place. It's not in here. So, yeah. So thank you for valuing what we're doing here, and I loved hearing you say it in your own words, and for clarifying that for me. So, anything else? Anything at all? Because I have some technical stuff to share about arm supports. I just want to make sure that we are all in the same place, ready to move forward. Just in case you have anything at all that you want to share about what we've done so far. Oh, I saw, there you go. Hello. Yeah. Hi there. Yeah. Just, you turn on your sound. Hey there.
So, hey, Leslie.
Hi.
So I'm curious what your opinion is then of assisting in a class. You know,
Manual
putting your
assisting,
hands.
like,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. We're not currently doing that, but I've had teachers assist me that felt great to me, and I've had assists that hurt.
Yeah.
So where the teacher comes over and thinks I need to be assisted in whatever certain way and doesn't ask. Do you assist, or what's your opinion on hands-on assists?
Yeah, I had to really, thank you for that. This is something that I'll be sorting out for the rest of my teaching life, okay? Because for me personally, I come out of a context of practice, not just as a teacher, as an educator, but as a clinician who has spent somewhere in the realm of 30,000 client hours working one-on-one with people with my hands as a body worker and a breath worker, as well as someone that, you know, works with therapeutic yoga. And so my inclination early on, when I started teaching this more anatomically informed, therapeutically oriented yoga, was just to default to my hands. I would go, here, let me, you know, when we'd do that. And it usually worked out fine. You know, it wasn't like I was yanking or cranking or jumping on people or forcing them down into Hanumanasana and tearing their hamstrings. I was never doing like super forceful adjustments, right? Now, there are certain traditions of yoga in which fairly heavy hands-on adjusting is the way of communicating. You know, in Ashtanga, for example, there are moments in learning the Ashtanga series where you really do require the teacher to be there supporting you or helping you with the drop back, or, you know, holding your foot in Padangusthasana or something like that, right? And that's just part of their methodology. And so what I've had to sort out through all of this is how not to just default to the thing that's easy for me, that I actually have some skill with my hands, you know. And when I feel that impulse to want to go and just physically fix what I'm seeing, I've learned how to translate that impulse into, number one, seeing if there's something I can say or do, or sometimes with just a very light touch of like, can you bring some awareness here or there? You know, it's not to physically move the person's body from one place to another. It's just to give them some little bit of sensory feedback in just the right place where they can feel in themselves what I'm seeing, you know? So for example, if I see someone who makes the transition from warrior one to warrior two, and that front knee just caves in, right? And I see that. The real question is, how do I respond to what I'm seeing? I can go over and I can take the knee and say, can you have the knee here? Because this is where it belongs. I can do that, you know? And I can do that with or without asking permission, by the way. I'll always ask, you know? That's just, you know, don't pass go if you think it's okay to go over and shove people's bodies around without asking them. I can't tell you how many people have showed up on my table having been injured by a teacher who literally came up from behind them or somewhere where they couldn't see and did something that they weren't prepared for or didn't want to have happen, you know, and couldn't have stopped if they'd tried because it just happened, right? Hopefully that's not being done so much anymore. Certainly not on Zoom. Right.
Right.
But the real question is, can I give that feedback in such a way that's useful to the person so that they can notice what I'm noticing and notice whether they have other choices? Like, are you aware of where your knee is right now? And I'm not going to say whether it's right or wrong. Can you tell where your knee is in relation to your foot? Okay. But what I'm more likely to say, if I see that thing happening, is, can you be aware of where the weight is in the 3 points of your foot? Because there's no collapsing of that knee inward for most people that doesn't correspond to some sort of imbalance in the samastiti of that foot. So even without saying that this is really about what I saw in your knee, I'll probably say something like, can you feel where the weight is distributed in your foot? And I may even go over and just very lightly, you know, say, you know, are you aware of where the weight is here on the little toe side of your foot? You know, just like brush it with my hand or my foot or something like that. And almost always, if they can get in touch with that. You know, and I'd only use touch if they couldn't do it on their own, right? It's like, well, I'm not so sure. And it's like, well, how about now? Can you feel where I'm touching? Yeah. Can you let your weight settle there a little more? Oh, yes, now I can feel it. And it's like, oh, and did you notice just then when you did that with your foot, did you notice if your knee changed its position, right? So whether I'm using touch or I'm using words, I think the main thing is I'm always going to be looking to engage that student in an inquiry rather than just administering a correction. How can this intervention be presented in the form of an inquiry that allows the student to have more participation in what's going on and more agency in what's going on, so that what moves their body into a different, perhaps more aligned position is them, something they became aware of. And if they need my help to get there, sure, you know, I can maybe touch it there or just sort of brush against it or whatever. But for a long time now, that's pretty much the level of physical touch I would ever use, right? Unless I'm in a situation where I'm demonstrating something hands-on about the breathing. Because there's things I do with people's breathing in workshops sometimes just to illustrate certain things about the rib cage and the movement. And I always ask for the asthma person, by the way, when that's happening. So if we were in a live workshop right now, Sherry, I would probably have asked your permission to have my hands on your breathing by now, right? Because there's certain things that you can only really communicate that way. Because, and this is just a bodywork thing. Like, what makes bodywork so effective in areas where your own personal practice may not have been able to make change even after many years? It's because I have leverage that you don't. I'm out here, you're in there. You know, I can put you in positions and get certain things to move or release or stabilize using my external leverage that you just don't have access to. And so that's something that's very powerful if you know how to use it. But also it's really sort of outside the realm of just what you would ordinarily be doing as a teacher in an asana practice with cueing or correcting or even touch. For me, touch is about bringing more awareness to an area where someone needs. It's about moving their prana. It's about moving their consciousness and their prana to some place specific. So that's the best.
You don't when they're saying in a forward fold, a seated forward fold, or they're on their back, you don't go in to help them get a little more out of it.
Yeah, not really, because you know then it's like a little bit more of my agenda has a tendency to creep into the process, right?
Yeah.
And that, by the way, that puts the more flexible people at risk than the stiff people in general. Because it's the flexible students who tend to become the teacher's personal Gumby toys, right? And that can lead to undesirable consequences, you know? And it's different if I'm working one-on-one with someone. If it's a client who I know quite well, and I have several of those, and I'm helping them with something or other in their practice, quite often that's going to be a blend of what they're doing on their own with their own practice, and then me, spotting or helping or whatever. That's more like a combination of a bodywork yoga practice session, right? But that's not what's going to happen in a group practice or a workshop or something like that. So I don't know if that's a useful answer to you, but that's just how I approach it. Okay, so anything else before we move on? Yeah, we good? Okay, so I'm going to switch cameras here. All right, here we are. So I said a little bit about spirals earlier, how there's no real straight geometric lines or Euclidean shapes in our bodies. And when we were doing that warrior practice, there were many different spirals involved that I could have spoken about using the language of spirals. I mean, the primary one is in the foot, because the foot is a spiraled structure to begin with, and the lifting of the arches, creating that support that comes up from the earth, that's actually traveling along certain sort of spiraling type pathways that really start with the arches of the foot. There were also spirals going on with the spine and the torso. For example, when we're here, which is the position where we were setting up for the triangle, okay, this is what I would call a double spiral for the spine, okay? So this back leg is externally rotated, and it's pulling this side of the pelvis in that direction, okay, which is it's turning the sacrum in that direction. Whichever way the sacrum goes is how the lumbar spine is going to go, because the lumbar spine itself doesn't twist very much at all. So whichever way your sacrum is facing, that's the same way your lumbar spine is going to be facing within 5 or so degrees of its twisting ability, okay? And the thoracic spine as well, because I'm lifting my sternum up in that direction. So everything basically from that back leg through my spine up to my sternum is in this one upward spiral. But then my cervical spine is going the other way, because I'm looking down at my front foot. So this is what I would call a double spiral in the spine, right? The thing that makes revolved triangle more complicated is that it's a triple spiral. So I've got that back leg thing going, okay, and it's taking the sacrum with it, lumbar spine, okay, but then from my thoracolumbar, where my thoracic spine joins my lumbar, I'm twisting the other way. Now I'm bringing my sternum around in the opposite direction here. So now there's a double spiral between my leg, pelvis, and lumbar and my thoracic, but then I take my cervical back down the other way. So that's actually a triple spiral, right? So that's one way to understand some of the dynamics of those poses. Now, we have spirals in our arms as well. And I didn't mention it explicitly because I was saving it for this part. When we're doing Warrior 2, there's a double spiral in the arm. And understanding that is, I have found a real key to understanding how we can use these limbs, which have evolved away from weight bearing as their function, as weight bearing structures. So here again, if we look at where the sternum is going, it's coming down and it's taking the arm and the hand with it. So whichever way my sternum is facing is going to be reflected in this spiral that goes all the way through my arms out to my hands. So my sternum is facing down, the palms of my hands are facing down. My sternum is lifting, the palms of my hands are lifting, right? Now with that, that's a single spiral, right? From one hand, through the arm, through the collarbone, through the sternum, and out the other side, they're all moving together, okay? Now for Warrior 2, what I have to do is keep everything from the sternum to the elbow in that same lifted spiral, but then from my elbow down, my forearm goes the other way. So that's now a double spiral in my arms. Does that make sense? So unless there's any question about that specifically, I'd like you to give that a try, and then we'll take it to the next step and see how that relates to the topic of arm supports. Okay, any questions about that? Is that enough to give it a start? Okay, so why don't we come up to your mats, and I'm just going to be here on this camera so I can be closer to my screen and see you. Okay, I can do this. Now, it may seem really obvious which way you should be where you should be inhaling, where you should be exhaling here, right? So see if it's obvious to your body which movement goes with which breath. So we're starting with feeling the sternum, and we're dropping the sternum and letting that spiral just pass all the way through the arm and then open, right? So just, yeah, and let these movements go with the breath, all right? So is there a breathing pattern that you're kind of falling into here? Is it as the sternum is dropping, does that feel like an exhale to you? And then as it's lifting, does that feel like an inhale? Yeah. What if you reverse the breathing? Can you have that make sense? If you're inhaling as you're dropping the sternum? Because dropping the sternum feels like an exhale to the front of the body, but it can feel like an inhale to the back of the body. We talked about that yesterday, right? So see if the backs of your lungs can experience something like an inhaling action as you drop the sternum down, and an exhaling action as you lift the sternum up. Okay. So what are you noticing there? Can you make sense of that breathing pattern? Now, I didn't say that you should be able to breathe as deeply and fully as in some other practices, but that's not necessary. This is about what's going on in the tops of the lungs. Okay. We definitely, the higher up you go in the lungs, the smaller the lungs are, but the breathing we can do there is quite significant. You know, the apex of your lungs comes here, just around where the collarbones are. There's lung in your armpit and in the back, you know, underneath where the shoulder blades are, there's lung. And we sometimes just literally need to be given permission to be breathing into the upper parts of the lung, because we're told quite often that that's bad to breathe there. It's just better to breathe in your belly. And people who breathe here are all tense. But, you know, if you just sort of free yourself to the possibility of breath happening there, it can be a whole different experience. And I would say that to do effective arm supports, we need to bring some space, some aliveness, some ability to create support through this part of our body. If it's all closed off and we can't breathe effectively there, it's going to definitely affect how effective our arm supports are. So any questions or comments about that, or what your experience was? Something, was it easy? Was it hard? What? Anyone? Was it weird to breathe into your back, or are you becoming sort of an old pro at that by now, after yesterday? Anything? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Susan. Okay.
So at first, it was awkward. I didn't think I could do it. I'm like, oh, maybe I don't think you can inhale this way. But I did it a few times. I actually felt like the breath was a bit better. I felt like I had a more active tone. It took some time, but
Okay.
it wasn't as hard as I imagined it to be.
Sure. Well, there's a lot of lung back there, and if you give the breath permission to go there with that shape change, you know, it sort of welcomes the breath can be welcomed into that area, right?
Yeah.
Dragana
Yeah.
says, yeah, still required some focus, but got adjusted. Okay. Does that literally mean you got adjusted? Was your back cracking? Some people actually feel those joints moving. Some people feel those costochondral, the costovertebral joints, sorry, in the back actually doing tiny little adjustments when they shift their breathing. So I don't know if that's what you meant by adjusted, but sometimes it does. Yeah. There you go, Dragana. Do you unmute? Yeah. Okay, there you are.
No, it was just it just got easier to do. That's all I meant. There was
I
nothing
see.
going.
Okay. All right. So you didn't get a chiropractic adjustment. Okay. Right.
I guess after a while.
All right. Cool. Now, I came up to the screen to watch you guys doing that, and let me just, if I may, give you a little bit of feedback on what I saw some of you doing. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the big picture here on the mat. When we're thinking of dropping the sternum, okay, language can be a little ambiguous when you're cueing something like that, because from a certain perspective, you could say, okay, I'm dropping the sternum, right? Well, yeah, I'm sort of dropping it down towards the floor, but I'm not articulating anything in the region of my sternum. The joints between the, you know, the ribs and the sternum and the spine and the breath in my lungs and my armpits and everything, that I can basically freeze all of that, not articulate any of that structure, and drop my sternum by just bending at the waist or my hips or something, right? So I think in cueing, one thing I've noticed is it's really important to be clear when I'm giving a spatial cue to somebody, like moving your body in space, you know, like bring your chest towards your thighs kind of thing, as opposed to, or at least as distinguished from moving the space through your body, articulating the joint. Because if I stabilize my hip joints, my lower spine, and everything basically from here down, and then really think of articulating the sternum and these top ribs and everything at the top of the rib cage, including the lungs and the breath, that's a very different experience. And some of us are going for the bigger feeling, the bigger breath, the bigger movement in space, at the expense of actually articulating some of these joints, which for many people get quite frozen. So one way to find that is sometimes it's better just to drop your arms at first and not be holding them out to the side, okay? Just drop your arms. And I can see this from the side here. So I don't have this consideration, what's going on here just yet, but I'm really just letting my sternum fall down and towards my spine, and then lift. And I can do that on an exhale or an inhale. Depends whether I feel like I'm breathing into the fronts of my lungs or the backs of my lungs. So maybe let's back off a bit just from the arms out to the side thing and let them just drop down, and just try to feel those movements in just the very upper part of your spine. All right, give that a try. Okay. It's quiet movement. It's a little movement. Okay. Now, okay, something else that I tend to see here is one way to convince yourself that you're articulating your sternum, that it's actually moving and dropping back, is to just pull your shoulder girdle forward and bury it in your shoulders. And then it looks like it's back, but it really isn't. And then to pull your shoulder blades back, which makes it seem like it's popping up and forward. So trying to impose that movement from the outside in, rather than letting it arise from the inside out, is another strategy. So that may be something to pay attention to. Are you allowing your shoulder girdle to just be a passenger, to just follow? What's going on in the upper ribs and the sternum without using these muscles like pulling your pecs or your rhomboids forward and back to create the movement? Right? So we're peeling away, if you will, all of the things that really aren't at the core of what we're trying to get to happen here, which is the breath that can happen at the tops of the lungs and the articulation that can happen at the top few ribs where they attach to the sternum. And this is an area that gets quite frozen. Okay. So these are pretty, this is like the equivalent of what we had to do with our feet to some extent before we could discuss some of the alignment perspectives from the standing poses, right? It's kind of a V yoga, the articulation of the sternum is one thing, but the pulling of the shoulder girdle forward and back, or the hinging at the waist just to move it through space. Okay. So anything that you noticed or uncovered about yourself or your own habits here, or how you're relating to these different movements just now? Anything interesting? Is that Andrea coming towards her device? Am I seeing that? Yeah. Okay.
Well, I was walking forward because I like to look at people up close, but I didn't have anything profound to share. I was just coming forward to listen.
Okay. Well, that's profound that you like to look at people up close. So thank you. Anything? Because I was watching you guys sort of working this out in your movements. I'm looking at the grid here, and I saw things like getting smaller, getting quieter, getting more self-reflective compared to when we were first maybe doing a lot of this stuff, right? So did anyone have that experience? Because I was kind of seeing it with a bunch of you. Just curious what that was like for you. I warned you that this is an interactive workshop. I really do. Okay, Maureen, thank you.
I found that when I was making the movement smaller and really focusing on the sternum, I felt a lot of sensation on the attachment points of, I guess it would be my pecs to the sternum. Even more so than I did in the back, but it was interesting when I took the arms out, that what I was feeling in the muscles through here.
And was that with the sort of standard breathing where you're exhaling sternum down, inhaling sternum up, or did it happen more when you reversed the breathing?
I kept naturally going back to standard breathing. So I was able to do the reverse, but for me, it did require me to focus.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
You're sorry that you made me focus.
I'm sorry I made you focus while you were doing yoga. Yeah, that's terrible. This is such an imposition, right?
I'm just trying to be honest.
Hey, I know, but that's Desikachar would always say that our yoga practice always has to be a little more clever than our habits, right? Otherwise, we end up doing it by rote, and it doesn't require our full focus. So, how do we keep challenging ourselves with all these adjustments along the way to bring our full focus back to bring ourselves back to something that requires our full focus? That's a challenge. Yeah. Okay. So I'd like to show you a graphic that is part of this conversation. Okay, I have to fire up the projector again because I had it off then. Okay, so it's heating up. All right. If I put it on mute for too long, it just turns itself off. It's sort of a power saving thing. All right, so that's not it. But I'll get to it in a sec. So this is a bit of anatomy that I think is really, really relevant to this topic, okay? So is that going to be visible? Let me see if I can shift cameras here and if it's reading on the camera. Yeah, is that okay? Because I still have the lights. I still have the lights down a bit to make the screen more visible. Okay. So the if we go back to our definition of alignment, which is a clear pathway of weight that goes from bone to bone to bone. Okay. Lydia, can you put yourself on mute? There's a lot of ambient noise right now. Thank you. So in standing, okay, it's a pretty straightforward pathway to get from your foot to your spine or your spine to your foot. Okay. Not counting all of the joints in the foot, okay, it's 4 joints. It's the ankle, the knee, the hip joint, the SI joint, boom, you're at the spine, your sacrum, where your center of gravity is. So that's an anatomical arrangement that works very well for stability, for weight bearing, and all of that, okay? The corresponding pathway to get from a hand to your spine is far more complex. There's a lot more moving parts, right? It's the wrist, the elbow, the elbow. There's 2 joints in the elbow. There's the ulnar hinging joint and there's the radial spiraling joint, right? So it's already more complicated. Your knee doesn't do that, but your elbow does, right? If your foot could spin like this in relation to your knee, can you imagine how much more potential for things getting screwed up in walking? That's not a good arrangement for weight bearing, but it's fantastic for all the things the hands can do, right? So elbow, wrist, elbow, elbow, shoulder joint, okay? And then I follow the scapula around to the AC joint, the acromion-clavicular joint, right? That would be here, where this distal end of your clavicle joins this acromion process at the front of your scapula. Then if I follow my collarbone to the next joint, I arrive at my sternum, okay, this area that I seem to be obsessed with. Now, this, to some extent, in the upper body is the equivalent of the sacrum in the lower body. It's where your articular anatomy joins or meets your axial anatomy. Axial anatomy is the skull, the spine, the rib cage, the sacrum, and the tailbone. The feet, the legs, the pelvic halves, the hands, the arms, the scapula, and the collarbone are all articular or appendicular, as they're sometimes called. So if we're going to find a pathway of weight that gets from your hand to your spine, which is what's required for aligning an arm support, it has to come through the front of your body, not the back. And yet, so much of the alignment cueing language we hear when we're doing arm supports is about micromanaging the relationship of your shoulder blades to the back of your body. Why is that? Why is that where everyone's focus is, when the only place where you can have a transfer of weight from a bone to a bone that's going to lead you from your hand eventually to your spine is happening here at the sternoclavicular joint. This is the only place where all of this shoulder girdle structure is actually joined to the rest of your body by a ligament. Here, bone to bone is ligament. Everything else is muscle, right? So just respecting the definition that we developed for alignment, we have to find a bone-to-bone pathway, and it has to pass through here. But you're not even at your spine yet when you're at your sternum, okay? You have to deal with ribs, you have to deal with lung space, you have to deal with heart space before you can get to the front of your spine, which is the weight-bearing part of your spine, right? If I follow the external surface of my rib cage, okay, it doesn't get me to the weight-bearing part of my spine. It gets me to the transverse process in the back of the spine. That's not weight-bearing. So that's another reason why accessing a pathway of weight through the back of your rib cage and your shoulder girdles doesn't work so well. It's the breathing heart space within the rib cage and the inner surface of the ribs, the surface of the ribs that faces the lungs, that faces the heart, that eventually arrives us at the bodies of the vertebra there. That's going to serve as a pathway for weight bearing. You can see how much more of a complex conversation this is than just standing on your feet, which is one of the reasons why I consider arm supports to be intermediate level skills. In other words, learn to stand on your damn feet and legs before you try doing that thing with all of this structure, which isn't very well suited for it. So before I go over the actual technique that I want to share with you, I just want to see how that sort of conceptual anatomical information landed for you as it relates to this this topic. All right, so that's another set of very, very common alignment cues that we're challenging here. All of this sort of draw your shoulder blades down and back or together or whatever it is when you're trying to find a way of supporting weight on your arms. So anything at all or that you need to say at this point? Because so when I know when I'm challenging very strongly the cueing language that we've been taught and that we've been teaching. And so, if there's a major cognitive dissonance there or any thoughts you're having or anything at all, Sherry, go ahead.
So I didn't know why, but this may be where you're going. I don't know, but I've taken a lot of handstand workshops because it's the thing I like to do. Yeah. And I learned in one of them that from the hands you push down instead of I'll start with down dog. Instead of down dog where you use your back muscles and you slide, you have a long neck and all that. When you're weight bearing, you actually want to disappear your neck and it kind of rounds you forward. And I'm anticipating and I'm just guessing that helps bring the bone to bone to your sternum by doing that
because I find that works for me, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious what you think about that.
Okay. Well, if the reason it works better for you is that it's helping you to access a pathway of weight that's passing through your sternum, great. But I don't think you need to bury your sternum in this protraction of your scapula in order to do it. It's more of an awareness pathway that we're looking for. And whatever position your shoulder blades want to end up being in that facilitates that pathway, that's what I would say would work best. Now, if this thing worked for you, that's great. If that's what gets you into that pathway, great. That may not be the case for someone else, right? So go ahead.
When I do that, I'm not thinking about my shoulder blades. I am actually thinking more, and I didn't know that until you said it. And so,
okay.
But maybe I don't have to round and do all of that to get to that.
Well, that's kind of what you're describing is a kind of a hack, right? That's like a body hack. It's like, okay, you're obsessed with where your shoulder blades are going and your back, fine. Pull them forward so you don't do that. And now, it's somewhat similar to what Anna Forrest teaches people to do with their toes, which is to lift their toes away from the floor, right? That's a kind of a hack for driving those 3 points of your foot downward, right? You're creating a lifting energy on the top of the foot, which creates a corresponding downward reach on the other side into those 3 points of the foot. That is one way of finding those points. The question I would have then is, okay, once you've used that sort of body hack to find those, can you relax your toes and not lose those points, right? So in a similar way, this gets you out of that whole micromanaging your shoulder blades in the back of your body and puts you into the front. That's awesome. Now, can we stay connected with that pathway of weight without the hack that got us there in the first place? So that's sort of where we're heading with this a little bit. And I would also question whether it's the best or most effective strategy for most people to be finding all of this after they've put their hands on the floor and put weight into their arms. Because on the one hand, literally, you're dealing with a closed kinetic chain. And what we're going to do, actually, is this open kinetic chain, meaning your hand is free to move around in space. And you have a lot more access to the range of motion and the spirals that we're going to look for that draw the myofascial lines of the arms, front and back, superficial and deep, into that sort of guy wire situation that results in the lifting of the arch of the hand. We have to get our hands and arms to do something similar to what our feet and legs are doing that creates that suction cup lifting thing in the arch that serves us well when we're supporting on our feet, right? And my serious question is that best found once you've put weight on your hands and then you're doing all that stuff, or when they're out here? So let's see what happens when we do it out here. Okay, so that's the next step. All right. So having paid a little bit of attention now, or maybe a lot of attention to what's going on with the sternum and the lifting and the lowering of those top ribs and the breathing that can happen in the tops of the lungs and in the armpits and all of that, okay, what we're going to do is find those movements, once again, with the arms extended out, as if we're getting ready to do Warrior Two. And at a certain point, I'm creating that uplifted spiral from my sternum all the way out to the ends of my hands. Now, I'm going to keep all of that uplifted spiral in place, except from the elbow down. And then what I'm going to do there is I'm going to turn my palms towards the floor without letting it pull everything above the elbow into that spiral. So now I've wrapped up my arms into this double spiral, okay? So are you all doing that? Good. Take a few breaths with your arms extended out, wrapped up into that double spiral, okay? Extend energy out the tips of your fingers, okay? And now flex your wrists, okay? So your palms are now facing the side walls of the room you're in. When you did that, did you feel something happen right in the pit of the palm of your hand, right? Okay, let them drop, let them go. Oof, okay, that's a lot of energy in the arms without putting weight into them. Let's try that whole thing again, all right? So we're doing a few of these spirals. Okay, and I'm keeping that uplifted spiral now, but from the elbows down, I'm turning my palms towards the floor, and then I'm flexing my wrists. Now, the next step would be to keep all of that wound up spiraled energy in the arms as I bring my hands in front of me. So now I'm doing chaturanga in the air. And I'm breathing.
Notice that Leslie's elbows are bent and they're tucked in towards his body. They're not straight ahead.
I'm not doing plank in the air. I'm doing chaturanga. I could do plank if I wanted to. All right. I could do either one, but the trick is to do it with that sort of intensity of that activation that we've created in the arms with those double spirals. And to feel the sort of suction cup in the palm of my hand, sort of drawing that space. It's like I'm breathing through the palms of my hands, right? As if I have nostrils in the pit of the palm of my hand that's feeding the breath into the tops of my lungs. Isn't it the best chaturanga you've ever done? It so doesn't suck like chaturanga can suck when you're, 90 degrees different. Okay, and relax. Whew, okay. All right, I'd love to hear from any of you on what that was like. If you were or were not able to feel the arch of your hand getting activated when we did that, I'd like to know. Either yes, no, or confused, whatever it is. I'm open to your feedback. Go ahead.
Hi.
So who was that?
Janice.
Yeah.
Altoona. Yeah, I just wanted to say that I noticed when we were doing the exercises before for preparation that I don't have a lot of awareness of when my sternum drops. Like I know about lifting my sternum, but like I really never practiced it, right? So like I couldn't tell if it was dropping. And then when I noticed I brought my arms forward into chaturanga, that it was dropping instead of lifting.
Interesting.
So that was
this,
useful.
by the way, is when we're in an in-person workshop. This is exactly when Lydia would be coming over to you and asking permission to help you feel how your sternum can drop. Yeah, this is when Lydia would step into her role as the sternumator, because she's really good at that. Yeah. So actually, are you demonstrating, Lydia? Can you first of all, can you highlight your screen there? Okay. All right. So yeah, you take the sweater off. Beautiful. Because Lydia had to work really hard to free this up and get to articulate this, and she's actually pretty good at them. Can you turn a little bit, just a little bit more? No, towards your. There you go. No, towards your right. Towards your right. A little bit more.
Good.
There, right there. Yes. Okay.
It's hard to see, isn't it?
Feels like
Yeah, I don't really think that's the way to do it. You need to see this.
From the side. Right.
It's hard to
Now notice.
Look
she's
here.
Yeah, she's not jamming her chin down to her sternum.
Oh, look at that.
It goes in. It almost goes in like a hollow.
How do you do that?
How do you
How
do
do
that?
I do that? Finding the stuff along the back here that had
That
to let
releases.
go.
Yeah.
I had to find that stuff that could let go.
Mm-hmm.
But starting by letting it rise was really helpful. And making sure the rise was happening in this part of my spine, like a tiny little mini cobra. Think of a tiny mini cobra. It's not going down to your mid back. And then when you try to release that cobra, there's some place for it to go. If you haven't let it rise, it's going to be very hard to let it go. But you're right. It is like I'm becoming concave here.
Mm-hmm.
And notice this is not being done by pulling my shoulders. The shoulders go along for the ride. Once it's back far enough, my shoulders just are dropped down. But I am not initiating with the shoulders.
Yeah. Like she's driving the whole thing, all the movement you're seeing in her body.
Starting
the shoulder girdles, the neck, the head, you know, the chest movement, lower down chest movement. It's all basically riding along with what's being articulated here. And this is a place where we don't generally have a lot of movement intelligence, a lot of sensory, motor, proprioceptive feedback available. We're much more facile with sliding our scapula around on the backs of our ribs, because those are big movements that we can do, right?
So one of the things that I found helpful when I was first starting this was using a very soft inflatable ball, like a Gertie ball. Do you know those things, the ones the children's toy, you blow them up with a straw and fill it up like halfway. It's a rubber ball, really soft. And I would actually lie on it here and have to find a way to release around it. I've never found another, I mean, I guess you could try a pillow. Pillows never worked for me. They were too firm. You know, it's not a hard ball. It has to be something really, I guess if you had a balloon that you inflated halfway. The idea is just you have to have something that lets you find a way to drape around it from in this position. But Andrea, you were doing exactly what I would be doing if I were there. I'd be asking, can I manhandle you? And I'd be pushing here. I would be pushing back here to see if you could find what needs to release in the back. I try not to touch anyone's back during this because then the tendency is to like get very rigid. I want to help them find a way to push in this stuff. I do it with
or to drape over your hand.
Or to drape over my hand, exactly. And try not to over engage the neck. It's not all about dropping your head. If you have a very flexible neck, then it's easy to fake it with that.
You can do it with your own hands if you really want to get some feedback.
That's why I was showing what I do. Yeah.
But this is a conversation in regards to how to find a healthy pathway of weight from your hand to your spine that very seldom happens with group instruction, alignment, cueing. You know, if you go to your very first yoga class, if you've never taken yoga before, there's there's odds that within the first 10 or 15 minutes of that class, you will have been asked to do about 20 down dog, up dog, chaturanga combinations, regardless of how much intelligence or awareness you have about, the different moving parts and the pathways of weight that are required to actually connect in a new way with this. How did you like your air chaturanga, or the idea that you had like nostrils in the palms of your hands that were like breathing directly into your lung space? I love that image. Did anyone else connect with it, or was it just too weird?
I just want to call your attention to the fact we have just half an hour
I
left.
understand the time. I'm looking right at the time. Thank you. Yes. Oh, by the way, Sherry said you couldn't read the text on this slide. It says pathway of weight from arm to spine. Yeah. So you have to stop spotlighting your view now, Lydia, if they're going to see the next view, which I'm putting up. Okay. There. Pathway of weight from arm to spine. So if we take this into an actual arm support, okay, we can prepare for it. What's a good angle? Okay, like this. There we are. So from kneeling, is the lighting weird at this point? Is it too contrasty or just very yellow?
It's really dark where you are, Leslie. I think while we're not using the screen.
Yeah. Is that better? Is it a little better?
Yes, a little better.
Okay. So I'm going to do that whole thing again. I'm going to find that double spiral in my arms. I'm going to flex my wrists. I'm going to bring my hands into that air chaturanga here. Okay. And then very slowly, very consciously, I'm going to put one hand down. I'm going to take a breath or two. Now I've closed the kinetic chain, right? But I've already put in place all of the action in my arms and the palm of my hand that I need. And I'm trying to stay connected now between the palm of my hand and my breathing space in the top of my lungs. And that slide that I have up there basically is a reminder that the place in my spine that I'm aiming for to connect my hands to my spine is right behind my heart. The fronts of those vertebrae right behind my heart, in the middle of my thoracic spine. We're talking about T6, T7, right around there. It's right behind the heart. And when I am able to feel somewhat of a connection between my hands and the back of my heart, I can slowly, gradually start adding more weight to this pathway. So it's gradual. And just like you don't want to do anything in that warrior series that compromises your base of support, I'm not loading more into this than I can handle with that arch I created with the palm of my hand and the double spirals. Okay. And in a classic sort of try this, try that, see what you notice thing, I'll ask you to do everything that we've been practicing up to this point and try some of what you just saw me doing, okay? And then contrast that with the way that you would usually get into plank from hands and knees, which is to put your hands on the ground, load weight into them, go into plank, and then figure out your alignment. Go ahead, try it both ways, see what you notice. And I'll watch. We will watch. Now remember, this spiraling is happening from the sternum out to your hand. You're not just spinning your arms and your shoulder joints, okay? I see some of you just doing that. This is everything we were talking about with the sternum and the breath and all of that shape change up there. That's what we're after. And for some people, okay, that's the thing that needs to be worked on for a while. You may need to spend a month getting your sternum to move before you're ready to go to the next step or put weight onto your arms, right? So this is, these are building fundamental bits of skill and awareness and proprioception that needs to be there to support this stuff in a healthy way. Okay. So if you're doing this on your knees, right, then you can slowly place one hand down, take a breath or two, place the other hand down, all right? Focus on that connection between what's happening in the palm of your hand, all the way through that spiraled up arm, through the sternum, into the breathing space there. See if you can imagine where the back of the heart is. That's where you'll find the front of your spine. It's in there, in that same space with your heart and your lungs and your breath and your pulse. And then notice how you can be very gradual in the way you bring progressively more and more weight into this exploration. Okay. And then, you know, once you've done that, you can come out of it and give your arms a shake. And then see what you notice in the way of differences. If you just start with your hands on the ground, put yourself in the shape, and then try to find those spirals or those connections, or find the arch in the palm of your hand in a closed kinetic chain, as opposed to finding it in the open kinetic chain first and then putting the weight down. Now, of course, from here, we can evolve things into down dog, up dog, chaturanga, a variety of increasingly more challenging shapes, with the inquiry all along the way is, okay, can I maintain this feeling of support as I do down dog? Can I maintain it as I come forward into up dog, as I lower down into chaturanga? You know, so if we view these different shapes and movements as challenges to our ability to stay integrated in how we're supporting ourselves, it sort of contextualizes them in a kind of a different way. Okay, so what are you noticing? This is the what do you notice part. Try this, try that, see what you notice. So I'm curious what you're noticing. I'm particularly interested, by the way, in hearing from anyone that does have wrist issues with arm supports. You know, if you're the kind of person that goes on your fists to protect your wrists, or uses props or whatever in arm supports because these get aggravated or inflamed, did you notice anything different about supporting on your arms using the sort of open chain double spiraling technique? Colleen.
So
hello.
Oh, Jamie, actually. Jamie was.
Sorry. Okay.
She already took herself off me.
Oh, okay, good. So Jamie and then Colleen. Sorry, go ahead.
So I have been practicing yoga like almost every day, and I've noticed recently that my wrists are bothering me. And so when I was doing the activation, I felt like it wasn't bothering me, but then I was getting down and I couldn't tell if it was getting better, if it was getting worse. So I was trying to do my habitual practice versus feeling that. And I don't know what I was feeling, but I do think that I think I've been getting lazy the last month, which is why I'm getting wrist pain again, which I haven't had in 5 years. So.
Right. So I don't know is a fantastic answer to what are you noticing, obviously. But it sounds like you're noticing there may be some potential there in changing the experience in your wrist. You may need to just very, very gradually add the weight bearing part of it, into it. You know? Into it. Yeah. Were you able to feel the activation of the arches when you had your arm out there, double spiral it, and then flex your wrist?
100%. Yes. And so then when I was in the air, it was fine. And then when I was putting weight onto it, you know, it's almost like when I'm starting, like, I'm like, am I doing it? And then, you know, you get in your head.
Sure.
But I do think that I'm losing that in my daily practice. I'm getting lazy, and I think that's why I'm getting wrist pain, which I don't normally have.
Well, here's something you can do. This is, it's sort of in between the air version of it and the floor version of it, is use the wall, right?
Okay.
So I don't really have a great wall here to do this with, but you know, actually this is a wall here. So I can do it to the side as well. So I'm doing that, and then I'm gonna, this is sort of like a Vasishtasana against the wall, but the Chaturanga would be more like just come into the wall and do a wall-aranga or something.
Okay.
So there's ways of being even more gradual with the adding the weight bearing to the arm, you know, from just doing it in the air. I like just standing and doing air chaturanga, frankly. I think that's great because I have this, like, you know, sort of image of, as I said, like I've got those activated arches in my hands, feel like nostrils, and I'm just kind of like
Absolutely.
breathing in and what's that?
If you hold it, I remember doing this early on in my yoga practice, instructors having us do it, and I have not done it so long, but you can get that same muscle engagement. It's so much easier to practice than actually holding a chaturanga, which is miserable.
Yes,
so.
It's a miserable pose and not well suited for a lot of people's either anatomical proportions, or it's a bad match for what they do with their arms and hands and wrists all day long. If they're typing or, you know, doing this or whatever, it's really the fact that it's such a ubiquitous part of how people do yoga with vinyasa, flow, and all the Ashtanga sequencing stuff. You know, I think we are long overdue for ways of reconsidering how we get into and out of certain things, and maybe take chaturanga off the table, at least for beginners, I would think, at least for beginners.
Yeah,
you know?
for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So thank you. Okay. So Colleen had something to say. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So I have issues with my elbows. I have hypermobile elbows. And so I noticed that the spirals, I lost the spirals as soon as I added weight. And I lost the feeling that I could feel up here. Once I came down and added weight, I lost it. So I think I need to just stay.
Sure.
I think
is there a wall?
Here, the wall, I think, is going to be good and save some pain.
Can you go and try it on the wall right now? Do you have a wall you can go and try it on right now in real time? Okay, go ahead.
I do.
You don't need to be on camera.
Do you want to be able to see me? I have to move.
No, just go and come back. That's fine.
Okay. Yeah. So the other awareness is just that of the sternum. I think that helps to save my shoulders. Because again, with repetitive chaturangas, I dump into the shoulders because you're getting tired. And so that connection reminds me that I need to stay connected. So I'm going to go try that.
Excellent. And while you do that, I want to ask Sherry, who brought up this thing about, you know, repositioning the scapula as a way of finding the sternum. Okay. Once you did this process, were you able to find that pathway without having to sort of worry so much about where your scapula were on your rib cage?
Yeah, for me, it was kind of more of a neck thing than the scapula prior. And I did try to not let any of that come into the picture. Like Colleen, I had a big challenge going from the air to the weight bearing, but I tried it quite a few times, and I think that I did it there, and I was just really focusing my attention where Lydia told us to, you know. Helped me hang on to that a little bit. And almost like you said, sucking up through my hand. And somehow I connected it to this spot right here. You know, there was a path somehow through my arms that took it here. So
cool. Interesting. Yeah. And what I want to point out, of course, is that, you know, your heart is this fairly large 3-dimensional shape. in your body. And when I'm directing your attention to the back of your heart, okay, that's where we get sort of really close to the part of your thoracic spine that can actually be doing some weight bearing, right? You may recall I did show you that image yesterday of the diaphragm, okay? All right. So here's the heart, just as a reminder. Here's the back of the heart. Here's the front of your thoracic spine, right? That's a vertebral body. The back edge of your rib cage connects to the transverse process, which is part of the posterior arch of the spine. This is not the weight-bearing part of your spine back here. This is, right? So we're aiming for a place that's pretty deep within the core of the body, not something that can be touched by your scapula back here, right? So did anyone else notice there was a little less micromanaging of where your scapula go in the arm support? You know, we're trying to take that conversation away from that, and by putting your awareness in all of this stuff, like, you know, the pathway to the spine is behind the heart kind of conversation. So was that noticeable? Oh, Colleen's back. So what did you notice, Colleen, at the wall? Oh, you said, okay, the wall is very insightful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was able to keep spirals. I think my practice will move to the wall for a while. Okay. So that was what you noticed. Interesting. Thank you. Yeah, wall is a great partner. It's a great partner for some of this. So anything else that you're noticing with what we tried? Anything at all? I'm just scanning around to see if anyone's raising their hand or. Dragonaut, there you go. Hello.
Well, it just seemed like the only way to get that section once I made the connection was to really lean into this part of the hand, like to make the edge. Then I could get that section, and then I could feel it going all the way to the back. And it was interesting. I tried it with downward dog just to see what it would feel like, and it just made the shoulders kind of naturally go down, like inwardly rotate. There really wasn't it. Just put the shoulders in a particular position. There wasn't thinking about it, like you said.
Exactly. Well, that's the sort of thing I was trying to point out. Thank you for that. That, you know, if your attention is at the foundation, at the base of support of what you're doing, and this is a base of support when we're bearing weight on it, right? So whatever. So what was that? Okay, sorry. So the things that need to sort themselves out upstream will do so in service of what you're trying to accomplish here at the base of support. So I think a lot of the cueing about micromanaging where your shoulder blades go for arm supports really becomes unnecessary if we pay enough attention to how to get everything here spiraled up in a way that can act as much like a foot as a hand can act like a foot, in that it also has an arch, but it takes a lot more to activate it. Remember, the spiral of the arches is built into the bony architecture of the foot. Remember the twisted plate image I gave you yesterday, right? That it's there just on its own in the way a foot is. It is not there in a hand. We have to create that intentionally to get it to serve or to function as a weight-bearing structure. It's not natural for the hand to do that, really.
Did you see, Leslie, that someone from the Spy Studio, who's named William Tyndall, wanted to know how this applies to down dog? I feel like you may have just answered that, but let's make sure they got what they were looking for.
Well, Jagana was saying that she experimented with it in down dog and found that she had to have a certain emphasis. See, now here's the thing about a hand. I can pretty reliably say and justify anatomically this model of 3 points in a foot and the 3 arches in the foot? Is there a corresponding thing we can say about the hand and the points? How many points there are, where they are, how many arches there are in the hand, right? That's an interesting, did anyone have that thought? It's like, we started with 3 points in the foot when we were talking about weight bearing there. Leslie didn't say anything about how many points there are in the hand. Was anyone wondering? No? Should we move on, or should we have that conversation? We should have the conversation? Okay, well, let me get to the slides that allow me to illustrate this for you guys. All right, so where are we? Okay, and I'm close to finding it. Right, I put them so I wouldn't lose them. Oh, there they are, okay. There's a whole section, great. So I'm gonna turn the other camera on. Okay. All right, so everyone can see what's on the screen now, right? This is so the next series of images that you'll be seeing were shot in the process of making the illustrations for the book Yoga Anatomy. So these are some of the images that we shot from underneath a sheet of plexiglass that was suspended on a couple of ladders, and Lydia was on her back with her camera shooting up through the plexiglass. So this is Amy in Vasishtasana. And it's a little clearer, I think, in the black and white version, because where the coloring of the hand is whiter is where the flesh of the hand is pressed firmly against the plexiglass. Can you all see that?
Can you enlarge that? Can you enlarge just the section around the hand so we can see it better?
Sure, let me just get there, hang on.
There you go. If you get a little bigger.
No, I'm gonna make it bigger. Don't worry, I just have to. Okay, there. How's that? Better? You can get bigger. Look. Okay, is that clear? So she's a little bit on the kind of the edge of her thumb here, out into this fingertip, 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 hand. There's a lot of weight here at the base of her index finger, but basically all through here, because she's got a lot of body weight on just one hand, right? Now that's going to be a different look when we see something that's being supported on 2 hands. Let's look at, we've been talking about chaturanga. Let's look at chaturanga. Okay, this is our friend Eden, who is one of our models. Okay. And actually, let me make that a little smaller so you can see both hands at once, because they're not the same. Shockingly, they're not identical. Okay. You can usually tell if people are right or left-handed from this view. Can you see she's a little more fully sunk into the structures of her right hand compared to her left? But here you can actually see the arch of the hand a little bit. Can you see that? And we didn't see that in Amy's, because first of all, Amy's hypermobile and she has a lot of movement in the joints in her body. All right. I'll show you Amy's hands again in a minute and you'll see what I mean. But here in Eden's hand, we can really see that central part of the hand where the arch is. And she's got her fingertips going, okay? She's got this distribution here. Notice that not so much here, okay? Dragana said that she had to really focus on sinking into this sort of inner edge here between the index finger and the thumb to activate something for her. Eden is much more kind of distributed toward the outside, the pinky side of her hand in her chaturanga, right? Here's Derek doing the crow. Now notice how he's back on the heel of his hand over here on this side, and not so much on this side. It's another righty, by the way. So I don't think anyone had ever done like photographic studies like this with the question of like, how many points are there in a hand? And, you know, can you say anything universal about it? Or does it vary from person to person? And does it vary within the same person from hand to hand? I say, yeah, it appears to. This is Amy in, I guess this is Cobra. Her elbows are bent here, so it's not like an up dog. I think it's more of a Cobra, where there's not a super amount of weight on the hand, like there would be in Vasisthasana, like side plank, right? So here you're seeing a little bit of the arch showing up in Amy's hands, right? But very different from side to side, you know? Let's see, what else have we got? We've got a wheel. There's a wheel. Nice arches there, right? And I'm not counting points. I'm just showing you that the hand is a very flexible, variable, malleable, mobile structure compared to a foot. And it's going to adapt quite freely to anything you're asking it to do. Yes, in a certain sense, we're getting it to behave like a foot would by having an arch and distributing the weight bearing on it in a way that's healthy, that doesn't just all jam up into the wrist. But how it gets that accomplished is going to be highly variable from person to person, and even from one hand to another within the same person, right? Here's, this is, I believe this is Chatus Padapidam. It's not quite wheel, you know, it's like a sort of a reverse hand position bridge kind of thing. Once again, in the case of Amy, we're seeing a lot of difference from one hand to the next. Yeah. So I don't think we can have as cut and dried a conversation about the points of the hand as we can with the foot. These views here actually do illustrate how variable the hand is and how adaptable it is to any task that we give it. So however your hand accomplishes weight bearing, so long as we can manage to activate those lines of support in the arches of the hands, that's the important thing, I think. So let's see, I think we're almost we're like 3 minutes out from 5 o'clock. My goodness, time just goes so quickly when we're having so much fun. At least I'm having fun. I'm going to speak for myself. So you guys are pretty awesome. I really have enjoyed this time we've spent together. And hopefully we'll get to do it again in a more in-person way at some point, where you know, the sternomator can come over and actually help you directly with your sternum. Any final thoughts or anything anyone would like to say? How about our wonderful hosts at Spy Yoga? Do you say spy or? Yeah.
They spy.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. This has been incredible. All the work, and Annette has done so much work to make this happen, and with you and Lydia. So it was such a great weekend, and I'm just so honored to have you guys like share everything, and you know, work with our teams and all the other people that have joined on as well. Yeah. I got it, and I love hearing the questions that everybody's asking.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure for me to be doing some teaching that's interactive, because as I said at the outset, it's been mainly me talking at a tripod for like 5 months. So I'm really, really happy to be able to share this in this format in this interactive way where we can be, you know, safe in our own spaces, and the rhythm of the 2 hours on and the 1 hour off seems to work really nicely. And so this has been like really awesome. And you know, we have the recordings, and we'll be putting those. It takes a while to upload them to YouTube, and they'll be on that password protected page by the end of the day, hopefully. So you can go back and review things and all of that. So I've got the recordings just waiting on my hard drive here to be uploaded, and that'll be available soon. And I would just love to stay in touch with you all. You know, we do have that cadaver dissection that's coming up. If you go to that web page we created for you, there's, you know, all the other stuff that I'm doing, and you know, the t-shirts that Lydia made, and all the books and videos and references, and you know, all that deep rabbit hole of some of the supporting material. I'm going to create a PDF of some of the key images that we've used on the projector, and that'll be there as well. So I still have work to do after we log off here to fully upload all of your resources to that webpage. So definitely check in with that.
There is a survey that you could answer anonymously if you prefer.
Yes.
And that's at the top of the webpage. So.
Yes, yes. And as I've mentioned earlier, we really, really do appreciate all the feedback we get, but especially the critical feedback, because that's what allows us to, that challenges me to really improve the quality of the presentations that we're doing. So thank you all so very much. And
take care.
It's been wonderful to work with you, and hope to see you all again
Stay
sometime.
safe. Stay safe.
Take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye now. Happy New Year. Yes.
Put in that email.